Welcome back, everyone. This is Silver again with Chapter 6 of my fanfiction, Rollie, Vita, and the Sorcerer's Stone. Chapter 6 is called Let the Fun Begin, so let's just get started. There are several interesting characters, really fixtures of Hogwarts. The ghosts, doomed to roam the halls, the menacing poltergeist Peeves, and worst of all, the caretaker Argus Filch. A bitter man because he was a squib surrounded by magic. He had a seemingly magical cat called Mrs. Norris that could sense when people were doing wrong and appear before them instantly, psychically informing Filch. But the gang was getting into the mix of things. The classes fascinated Rollie and Hermione. They studied the stars and magical flora, and the history class was taught by a ghost. They loved charms the most. It was the most practical, and the head of house was the professor. Transfiguration was also interesting with Professor McGonagall. All the extra study they'd done over the summer helped them conquer many things the first years found difficult, either right off or within a few attempts. Their first attempt was turning a match into a needle. Simple enough, thought Rollie. He and Hermione accomplished the feat after 3 attempts and went on to help Neville. By the end of class, they were the only 3 to accomplish it. McGonagall favoured them with a small smile as she went about helping others. They had yet to get their flying lesson, and the final indoor class was potions. As Ravenclaws, they weren't as worried as the other houses that weren't Slytherin. Neville expressed his terror. "I've heard Snape is scary, and only favours his own house while sabotaging everyone else," he shuddered. "The word in Ravenclaw is he won't bother if you don't make mistakes, especially dangerous ones. Sit with us, Nev, and we'll make sure you are all right. And you'll help us because you're an expert in herbology already. It really is a sister subject to potions. Plus, we literally studied the book backwards and sideways and forwards. And you weren't Hufflepuff," Hermione intoned. Neville sighed a heavy breath and nodded. Potions was in the dungeons. It was creepy and cold. Professor Snape liked to billow in like a bat, and that didn't help the situation. He immediately went to taking roll, bursting out with surprised questions upon completion. "As there isn't much foolish wand-waving here, some of you won't consider this magic. But it is a glorious, powerful branch waiting for a gifted to utilize. You can bottle fame, brew glory, even put a stopper in death." Everyone was enthralled with his speech and jumped as he barked out names. "Vita! What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Riley looked straight at the professor, thought a second and replied, "Draught of the living death, sir. It makes a person appear dead, but are in fact in a deep sleep, only to be cured with the antidote." Snape raised his eyebrows slightly, but moved to the next victim. "Longbottom, where would you find a bee's oar?" Neville gulped and looked over to Rollie and Hermione to gather strength. "Sir, in the stomach of a goat." Snape couldn't believe that no one faltered yet. There was always at least 3 fools in a class. "Bones. The difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" He sneered, hoping she'd faint or get it wrong, so he could reprimand someone. "Professor, they are the same plant, also known as aconite." Snape was highly frustrated, but also pleasantly surprised. He never went an entire class without yelling at someone. He asked a few more questions, but all the Hufflepuffs took a cue from Neville to study hard and well ahead. He was becoming sort of their leader academically, and also socially. He had strong, smart friends in all of the houses. Ravenclaw already studied well ahead, but knew it was most important for potions. Not one person got their question wrong. They worked hard on their cure boil potion, and all turned in an acceptable or better. Neville got an exceeds expectations, and Hermione and Rollie got outstanding plus, much to Snape's chagrin, but he did feel like they may be prodigies in the subject, or very well disciplined at least. He was unfair, but wouldn't stifle those who did well and actually followed direction. He graded fairly, but just didn't give house points fairly. Flying was an entirely different event. Neville was terrified. Too many experiences of being thrown out the window skewed his idea of flight being fun. Riley reminded him if he knew how to fly, he would be safer, and that helped him get over the fear some. Hermione also wasn't terribly excited about it, but couldn't think of an excuse why not. Just a natural fear of heights, she told the others. Riley knew it was because she could learn to do it from books, but had the same argument. "It's like being a baby bird. They're probably scared to death in a nest and not knowing how to fly. If they fall, they get hurt. They could die. But once they learn, that fear is gone. As magical beings, flying is as natural to us as birds. Once we learn, there's nothing to fear about falling." The entire class took in what he said and calmed a bit. There were some flubs at first, but by the conclusion, everyone putted around a few feet above ground, proud of themselves and feeling even better about what Rollie said. Rollie, though, was definitely born to fly and was allowed to zip around, in his case, effortlessly. "Really, Rollie? You can't be great at everything," Hermione huffed good-naturedly. "And I'm not. I'm sure we'll find something someday that I'm horrible at, but not today, it would seem." He laughed and flew around more, but eventually stopped to help others as much as they'd allow him. 2 months into their time in Hogwarts, the gang was sitting at breakfast at the Ravenclaw table when some Slytherins had enough of their house members mixing. "Draco, seriously, what are you doing over here? Can't believe you're still mixing with these filthy blood traitors and muggleborns," drawled Pansy Parkinson. "I don't know what's so difficult for you to understand, Pansy. First, these are friends of mine, and I'm cultivating relationships for a better future, the core philosophy of Slytherin. I happen to be the #1 student in our year for our house as well, so what is so confusing?" Draco was calm and explained in the terms of Slytherin would understand, and couldn't argue when that was the outcome. Pansy just sputtered and scowled. "Well, I'm telling your father who you're associating yourself with, and—" Draco just raised his eyebrows, then turned back to his studying he was working on, having finished eating breakfast. "But Draco—" Blaise pulled her away and waved goodbye to the group. The others just followed, deflated, having no other comeback. "Nicely done, Draco. If you'd like to avoid speaking about it in the future, if you see them walking this way, I found an amazing spell. Colo Shoe. Glues their shoes to the ground so they can't move." Rollie praised him. Drake's lips curved up slightly and he continued with his work. "What about Locomotor Wibbly?" exclaimed Neville. "Or Incarcerus?" suggested Ron. "Draco would probably like to be less conspicuous about it. Maybe Impedimenta," piped in Terry. The group laughed that there were so many ways to stop a person from moving. They went off to their classes. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff had charms, and Slytherin and Gryffindor had herbology. Neville followed closely behind Rollie and Hermione, the rest of the claws just behind. Draco's and his puppies and Ronald all went toward the front to go outside. Slytherin wasn't the only one having issues. Even Ron was given flack for always hanging outside his house with others, but he was the #1 in his year for Gryffindor, so his brothers backed him up as having good influence and were relieved they didn't have to help him. Ron was also feeling good because of the constant praise he was getting from his parents. Sure, Percy was always #1 in his year after Penelope, but Ron's differentiating factor was cooperating with other houses. None of his brothers really ever did that. So not only were his grades great, but he also was part of something that he can say no one else in his family had been. He'd found a niche, like Rollie said, and because of Rollie, he continued to try his hardest to be the best Gryffindor in his year, even if he couldn't surpass the others. He was the best at chess still, even though they didn't show that in classes. Maybe he could find one he'd be the best at above everyone. Neville didn't get any issue from the Hufflepuff house. He helped some of them with their homework and he was well liked there, but they knew he had his group of friends already, and in the 2 months they'd all become very tight-knit. The Puffs were an easygoing group and didn't much care what their friends did or who they hung out with. They were loyal. In the Charms class, Rollie sat front and center with Neville to his left and Hermione to his right. Padma sat to the right of Hermione, Terry sat to the left of Neville, and Lisa to his left. The rest of the students filled in and took their usual seats. They had finally gone through all the basic theories and wand movements, and were finally to be doing actual magic. Even though Rollie's group was far past proficient in the basic spells first years learned, the class had to go at the pace the professor prescribed. Rollie just shook his head that it had taken 2 months to start doing wand work. In their lessons with the professor, his gang had already mastered Wingardium Leviosa, Alohomora, Colloportus, Inflammare or Incendio, Lumos, Nox, and Spongify. In their own group sessions privately, they learned Accio and Depulso, Arresto Momentum, Res Momentum, Defindo, Reparo, Expelliarmus, Locomotor, Astrictus, Vocillo, Infrigido, Aguamente, Bombarda, and Engorgio, to name a few. They worked on 2 or 3 spells a week in their 2 sessions without the professor and learned 1 more per week with the professor. But in the class, they'd just been practicing wand movements and speaking about intention and focus. This was the first class they'd be doing any magic. Now, don't forget the nice wrist movement we've been talking about. Swish and flick. You all have your feathers? Professor Flitwick looked around. Good. The incantation is Wingardium Leviosa. Swish through the Wingardium and flick by the A in Leviosa. A nice smooth movement. Please, Miss Granger, a demonstration. Hermione stood and moved to the front of the class beside the professor. She had her feather and set it down on his desk. Turning toward it, she spoke the incantation as she swished and flicked. The feather rose, and she directed it and set it back on her table at her seat. She followed and sat back down. Very good, Miss Granger. 10 points to Ravenclaw. Now, everyone, give it a go. The class started. Rollie's row started sword fighting with the feathers once they were in the air, smiling but not making any noise, not to distract the others. After a few minutes, they asked the professor about the homework and started on that while the other class members continued to try to master the spell. They did this in most of their classes, completed the majority of their homework before it was even over. The bell rang and everyone gathered their belongings and left into the hall for their next class. Sue Lee, who wasn't in their group, along with her friends of Ravenclaw, Michael, Anthony, and Mandy, surrounded her, were upset to take nearly the entire class to master the spell. Although they did, they blocked Rollie's group. Think you guys are so great. Can just joke in all the classes because you're so great. Sue Lee spat. We demonstrated we were proficient at the spell and practiced doing additional things with it, and then completed our homework as not to disturb the rest of the class. So what is your issue? Rollie calmly stated. You were showing off in there. You think you're better than us. Michael raised his voice in response. We don't think any such thing. We've put in hard work and effort to get where we are. If you want to do better, you can as well. We don't think we're better than anyone, and went out of our way to be considerate to the rest of the class. Neville's voice raised a little in anger at being accused of something. Hermione placed a hand on his left shoulder, and Rollie put a hand on the other. She finished the conversation. You will not have us late for class, so move aside, or do you want to see how much we know exactly? She subtly threatened. Though the gang knew she wouldn't break the rules about spells in the corridor, she could bluff with the best of them. The claw group moved aside, seeing the fire in not just her eyes, but the entire group's. They feared the look Rollie was giving them, protective and fierce. They learned their lesson quickly, to think harder before accusing that group of doing anything selfish or detrimental to others. It didn't stop the jealousy, though, and it didn't occur to them to actually spend more time studying. They didn't know the group system and didn't have one of their own. Ron was also getting similar treatment on his way to his next class from herbology, where he partnered with Goyle most of the time, as Draco and Crabbe usually partnered. They were his closest friends, and he was friendly with the other Gryffindors, but they joked a lot, which he liked, but he wanted to have good grades because of his friendship with Rollie. Weasley, too good to partner your own house. Maybe you should have been a Slytherin, said Dean Thomas tauntingly. Oblivious, Ron just stated facts. I don't think I can be in Slytherin. They like to keep secrets. Although I have ambition, I tend to be an open book. Weasley's definitely got in the house he belongs. Not sure about the rest of you, though. Draco entered the fray. What's that supposed to mean, Malfoy? Seamus Finnegan yelled. Well, first, you all need to learn some history about the founders. Slytherin and Gryffindor were best friends. The Sorting Hat was Gryffindor's hat, so it ought to know one above all the other houses. Ronald is brave and daring, and the epitome of a Gryffindor. And as the epitome of Slytherin, it doesn't bother me. We were meant to be friends. It isn't brave of you lot to gang up on him. Ron high-fived Crabbe and Goyle, and then Malfoy. They just walked off to their next class laughing. At lunch, they all sat at their own house table, though Ron felt a bit unsafe aside from his brothers, who'd look out for him, so he sat near the twins. He told them what Draco said about him and how the other lions were treating him. Gred and Forge told him not to worry, they'd take care of those Gryffindor boys. Ever since Ron became friends with Slytherins, other houses, the twins did less pranking of their year friends, especially Slytherin. It had opened their minds, and they could get enough volunteers to try out their products in the making. That night, at their study session, before entering the library, Ron told them all to be aware that an epic prank is on the way for Dean and Seamus and the other Gryffindor boys. They already had left the Great Hall. Rollie was over the Halloween decorations since this was the anniversary of the night his birth parents died. He didn't really want to celebrate. Those still there witnessed Professor Quirrell running in yelling about a troll in the dungeon. Madame Pince had been informed by a passing prefect, though. You students better get to your dorms. She was ushering them out the door. Excuse me, madam, but isn't the Slytherin dorms in the dungeons? Rollie asked, and Draco nodded, his eyes wide. Merlin, help us, you are right. I better inform the professors. You all follow this prefect to the nearest house dorm. It was Percy. "That be Gryffindor, and going up we are less likely to run into the large beasts. Follow me, you all." They followed closely behind Percy, but began to smell something horrible. "I think the trolls left the dungeon," Rollie whispered, and they all ducked down a corridor, hopefully away from the troll. They were mistaken, as they saw it standing at the far end of the hall, huffing like a bull upon seeing them. The 12-foot-tall behemoth was smelly, had bumpy grey skin, and was holding a club the length of Percy's leg, but much thicker. Rollie didn't know, but he was a born leader, and made even better by the way people always treated him as though he had the best ideas. Even though Percy the prefect was here, it was Rollie who stepped up to plan. "All right. We need to confuse it. We know troll hides are near impervious to magic, so hit the club, hit the eyes, hit inside the mouth, if you can." He glanced at Percy. "Conjure sharp objects and banish it toward him. Try not to kill him. He probably wandered in by mistake and is just a creature. He doesn't know any better. Let's just try to knock him out until the professors arrive to levitate him out of the castle." Rollie nodded, and they all nodded in turn, but waited for him to begin. "A strictus," Rollie quietly spoke, as he pointed his wand past the troll onto the wall behind him. "Dispulso," Hermione followed up, and a suit of armor crashed into the troll, tripping it backward and onto the wall where it stuck. It yelled out in frustration, trying to pull itself off. Neville pointed the next spell into the troll's open mouth. "Stupefy." It quieted down, but wasn't knocked out yet. Draco used Aguamente, and Ron finished with Inrigido, freezing the now soaking troll, encasing its torso. One arm was still free, the club arm, and as a last tired resort, it threw the club toward them. Rollie stepped forward, watching the club seem to move in slow motion. Raising his arm slightly, the gang immediately understood the next spell he planned to use. They gathered behind him, and they simultaneously spoke the levitation charm and flicked the club back toward the troll, right into its face, knocking it out. Percy just watched in awe as these first years seamlessly coordinated a counterattack and subdued a Class 4 magical creature. As he stood there stunned, Draco sighed heavily. "Well, that should hold it a little while." "Good call, Rollie." Focusing outside of its skin, they heard running around the corner where Professor Snape, Quirrell, McGonagall, and Dumbledore appeared. Looking past them, they gasped as to see the troll knocked out. "Good work, Percy. Very well done for a 5th year." Professor McGonagall started to praise. "I'm sorry to say it wasn't me, Professor. I was here, and I tried to get in front of this lot, but they were fast-moving and fast-thinking. It was a joint effort on their part. I watched it all happen very fast." The professors' mouths were agape, and they were silent for a few seconds, long enough for Professor Flitwick and Sprout to arrive. "What's going on here? We need to get this troll out of here." The no-nonsense Professor Sprout's voice woke up the others from their stupor. "Yes, my dear Pomona, you are correct." Dumbledore took charge. "It seems our first-year students took care of the troll, and we were a bit dumbfounded. Not many first-years could take on a fully grown mountain troll and live to tell the tale. 20 points to each of you. You can go off to your own dormitories. We will take it from here, and congratulations. But please, don't make it a habit." Professor McGonagall ushered them away. The students smiled and nodded, saying goodnight to those in separate houses, and as instructed, went off. Percy led his brother back to Gryffindor. Flitwick led his claws back, and Professor Sprout and Snape, with a slight limp, led their own house as well. The professors left, levitated the troll outside, and called the Ministry Creature Department to get it back where it belonged. Only a few of them thought it was let in on purpose. The rest thought it was a weird accident the troll roamed in. This was something Rollie would tell his mums as a more fantastical story than as a danger, since no one was hurt. By breakfast, the entire story had been told around the school, but the gang had something more interesting to look forward to and were not disappointed. The entire first-year boys of Gryffindor, save Ron, grew pink feathers and duckbills after their first bite of breakfast. The entire hall laughed. Everyone learned a serious lesson about bothering Ron and about his friends. Not only did they have the infamous Weasley twins on their side to prank you into embarrassment, they'd taken on a fully grown mountain troll, no problem. This was not a group to mess with. Alright, that's the end of this chapter, and I'll see you next week.